tell, but it looks as if we do have a quorum.
Good. We did. We do.
Yes, we have. We should be good to go. Can't hear you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Welcome you to our March 25th meeting of the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. We are happy that each of you is able to be here this morning, both in person and virtually. At this time, we'll ask person let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, at this time, Madam Clerk, let's have a certification of the quorum, please. Roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges,
Here.
Mr. McGraw. Charles City County, Mr. Coda. Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Here.
Ms. Haley. Richland County, Mr. Spoonhauer.
Here.
Thank you. Hanover County, Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Davis. Henrico County, Chair Thornton.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. O'Bannon. New Kent County, Ms. Page. Powhatan County, Mr. Byerly.
Here.
Mr. McClung. City of Richmond, Mayor Stoney.
Here.
Ms. Newbill, Dr. Newbill. House of Delegates, Delegate McQuinn. Senate, Senator McClellan. Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown. DRPT, Ms. DeBrule.
Here.
Ms. Dubinsky.
Here.
Thank you. Vdot, Mr. Britch. Mr. Mann.
Here.
Virginia Port Authority, Mr. Edwards. Ms. Vick. Ms. Nelson.
Here.
GRTC, Ms. Tim.
Here.
Ms. Adams. RMTA, Ms. Dean. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the roll call, and we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Thank you so very much. Okay. Mr. Parson, we have a statement for virtual participation.
Yes, sir. Thank you. We are continuing our efforts to be as welcoming and inclusive as possible, and a number of members of the authority are joining us remotely, and we are continuing that practice for the foreseeable future.
Thank you so very much. We don't have any new commissioners, but we do always like to welcome each of you. As far as the chair is concerned, we have the most outstanding group of commissioners with this new tool that we have called the Cbta, and we're thanking you so much for being a part of that. And we can't thank you enough. Okay, we're moving in now to consideration of amendments to the agenda. Are there any? Okay, seeing none, the chair would recommend a vote on this. Use my voice vote.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve the agenda.
Second. Motion has been made and properly second. Are there any questions? All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, all right, so now we move to approval of the February the 25th agenda of the Cbta minutes. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at them. If not, maybe you will later on, but for the most part, most of you are here. Again, the chair will entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
Move for approval, Chairman.
Motion has been made and properly seconded. Are there any questions?
I'll second it.
All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed? So the minutes then are approved. Okay.
Ms. Firestein, just for the record, that was, Mr. Carroll had the second.
Thank you.
Chairman, what is very significant about the Cbta is that we have a period called the open public comment period. That is when we have guests or persons maybe who are in a virtual situation can express any views or statements that they may have at this time. Mr. Parson, do we have anyone to sign up or to contact us for this at all?
We didn't have any advance notice. There are a number of people attending virtually, and I would suggest if anyone who is joining the meeting this morning from a remote location, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If there are questions, at this point, we don't have any submitted. There are a number of folks in the room with us behind you, Mr. Chair, so I would also encourage you to open the floor if there's anyone here in the room.
Okay, is there anyone here who would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, that I haven't heard from anyone virtually. So we have had the opportunity, so we will close that public comment period. The next portion here is the Cbta Chairman's Chair, and I was looking at this 15 minutes. You will be spared. We really don't need that much, actually. There's not too much report, other than the fact that always be careful when you select the chairman like you've done, especially those with a literary background. We always like to be thinking about what can we say to make sure to let the public know what it is we are doing. So I would like to share with you, though, a concept, and you've heard me express this in different ways, and that as we are building the Cvta, a little quote here. Some of you have heard this before, because rarely do we hear new things, but it goes like this: you cannot build a great building on a weak foundation. You must have a solid foundation if you're going to have a strong superstructure. So I'm bringing it metaphorically now. Not only are we carrying the Cbta toward future direction, but we're talking about that structure, which is very important. And we even added another word to that structure today, superstructure. And that's a structure that our citizens will say, hey, I want to go to that particular district because it is vibrant and it is competitive. And you have places there that we need to go, that we can even spend our money if we choose to. So that's the chairman's report. Okay? Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda, item A5, I'm going to ask Mr. Mann to help me out with the details on this, but there has been an opportunity that has arisen over the past, we'll call it a week, recent news about some innovation funding that has been made available to the region by Vdot for a specific project in the western part of the region in Powhatan and Goochland County. And there's an opportunity for the Cbta to contribute to help advance that project a lot quicker than we had assumed. So I think there's probably going to be lots of questions about it, but Mr. Mann, would you mind just taking a few minutes and providing the details about the project and the opportunity?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vdot has come across some innovative technology funds that are available that we would like to assign to a project, 288 northbound hard shoulder running. basically from Route 711 to Route 6. It's been a project that's been on the books for a while. Chet, how long? At least 5-6 years? Yes. It's been submitted several times for smart scale funding. So we've identified that project as a place we would like to place these funds. It's $6 million of innovative technology funds. So what we would like to do ultimately, and I don't think we're quite ready to make the ask yet, we got some more work to do with some of the localities, but we would ultimately like to ask Cvta to potentially commit some funds towards that project for a smart scale application that, along with the Vdot funds, we feel like would put it in a place that it would score sufficiently to be funded in the next round of smart scale. So that's kind of a quick synopsis of it. Happy to answer any questions if I could on that.
Commissioners, you've heard this, and we call this, I would use the terminology, good news. So any questions to pose to Mr. Mann?
Mr. Chair, just a little bit more detail in terms of what we expect in terms of the application and laying out the project and where the funding sources are coming from. This project is a northbound component. There's a north and a southbound. So the northbound component is one of the 5 projects that Plan RVA is submitting a pre-application for in Smart Scale. So we're talking about the cooperation between all 3 of our organizations, between Cbta, Plan RVA, and the TPO. This is one of those opportunities. So Plan RVA is submitting a pre-application for this project with the availability of the innovation funding from the state. If Cbta was willing to provide a leverage amount to go into this project, that the expectation is that those 2 sources of funding together would bring down the overall cost of the project to a range that is very attractive for the smart scale applications and would receive more favorable review. So as Mr. Mann said, I think we do have some work to do between now and the next meeting in April, so that we can bring back an item for your full consideration and potential support. But we wanted to put this out today so everybody was aware that it was something that was being considered.
Okay, so commissioners, is your opportunity to ask any questions about this. Ms. Peterson?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Mann, was the 711 to, what was the extent of the?
It goes from 711 to Route 6. So
all right, does this cover more than one jurisdiction?
Yes, it's in Powhatan and Goosen.
Powhatan, okay, so trying to figure out whether it was regional or individual.
Other commissioners, Mr. Hodges?
And I understand this is a heads up and we don't have the details. And I understand Cvta was established to take advantage of opportunities to leverage regional funds. And I would support that. It just, I'm sure there are other opportunities out there and we hope we take advantage of it. Just a general comment. Thank you.
Other comments, remarks by commissioners? Okay, all right. That's just for information.
Yes, Mr. Chair, if it's okay with you, I think the next logical step would be to put this in front of the TAC when they meet in April, and they'll be able to take a look and provide a recommendation for your April meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
We'll do that. We'll do that.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Firestone not being with us, she may not be aware that Mr. Brown has arrived, and so I just wanted to bring that to her attention.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I've noted it that he's present now. Thank you.
Okay, now we go to committee reports. First one is Cbta Finance Committee update. Who's gonna give this?
That would be me, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Believe me, he was looking for you.
That would be me, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, good morning to you, and as you said, we are building a sound foundation here at Cvta, and it's the work of the Finance Committee over the course of the last year plus that's been at the center of that work. And so I want to thank all the members who have spent their time participating and and also the staff that's provided their expertise to get us where we are today, not just as a committee, but also as an authority as well as a body. Today, we have a number of items that will be presented to the body. They include the introduction of our newly selected financial advisors and 2 items from Ms. Heater on the FY22 budget amendments and scheduling of the public hearing of the FY23 administrative and operating expense budget for the Cbta. So, Mr. Chairman, let's jump right into it. And we have our financial advisory services provider, Pfm Introduction. They were introduced to us at our finance committee meeting, and we said we would love to introduce them to the entire authority as well. And they are here with us today, and I'll hand it over to them for their presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christy Choi, and I'm a director at PFM. Here with me is Kevin Roddy. My colleague Kevin and I are very excited to be part of the Cvta team and being part of this very important regional transportation initiative. On the next slide, on slide 2, we met with the Finance Committee earlier this month, and the Finance Committee instructed us to prepare a brief presentation in front of you this morning. And these are the discussion topics we intend to cover this morning. I'm going to kick things off by providing you with an overview of the regional transportation entities in Virginia. Kevin's going to walk you through some variables to consider in building a funding plan. And then we're going to wrap things up by walking through a couple of illustrative examples of what funding scenarios might look like for Cbta along with the next steps. So on slide 3, we've got a few bullets for Cbta sister agencies, which I'm sure you are all very aware of, the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, NVTA, and HR-TAC, the regional authorities in the Northern Virginia and the Hampton Roads region. And what I wanted to talk to you about in terms of these 2 entities is that while they share a lot of common characteristics, they are very different in terms of their financial profile. So I just wanted to illustrate what kind of different ranges other entities have taken upon themselves. So in the case of NVTA, they have primarily funded all of their projects, and I think to date it totals more than $2 billion, using primarily cash on hand. And they only had 1 debt issuance back in 2014 for a modest $70 million roughly. In the case of HR-TAC, on the other hand, that entity, even before the revenue started flowing in the door, the region as a whole had identified a significant amount of regional needs, large-scale projects that they wanted to fund from the get-go. So when the revenue started coming in the door, the question was more about how do we fund these very large-scale projects that we want to fund as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So they leveraged quite a bit. To date, they've issued more than $2.7 billion in debt to fund, I think, what's over $5 billion worth of projects. So those are 2 very different financial profile and funding models, but I just wanted to share that story with you. On the next slide, on slide 4, we also have Vdot and VRE on this page. VRE stands for the Virginia Railway Express. And these are also 2 other entities in the region that's funded projects. And we put them on this slide because they also, like Cvta, have a fuels tax revenue component to fund multiple of projects to date. And since Cvta also has fuels tax revenues as its funding stream, we think that from this case studies, there's insight that we can glean to in building our own funding plan and thinking about how to leverage our own revenues. And specifically in the case of VRE too, they have their first bond sale coming up later this calendar year, and we have recently helped them adopt debt and financial policies, which I understand is something that Cbta would also like to embark upon in the near future. So on slide 5, in summary, transportation entities in Virginia have a history of utilizing both sales and fuels tax revenues and as in varying CIP based on cash flow needs and timing of the needs. The ratio of how much debt versus how much cash to fund projects have varied across the curve. But generally speaking, the ratings and the credit of each entity in its debt issuance has been very strong in the AA category. And that's primarily due to the underlying economy of the region, but also the strength of each of the revenues that were pledged to the bondholders in the case of these various entities. On slide 6, this is obviously information that you already know, but Cvta's revenues come from sales tax and fuels tax, primarily sales tax taking about 70% of the revenue stream, and that totals in fiscal year 22 estimate dollars, 181 million. 35% of that goes for the regional projects, which is $63 million in aggregate. And I just wanted to note that in the next few slides, we're going to be talking about funding plan and revenues available for projects. And all of those discussions, we're really focusing on and using this 35% allocated $63 million per year figure in talking about those numbers and analyses. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin.
Yeah, we just wanted to talk about a few of the variables we'll be considering as we're trying to build that solid foundation that Chairman Thornton spoke about. And first and foremost is really understanding the authority's objectives. As Christy said, there's a wide range. NVTA did a lot of pay-as-you-go. HR TAC did a lot of bond financing. So our objective is really understanding and developing a plan that meets y'all's objectives. And the first thing we're going to do is meet with each individual locality and let y'all explain to us what you're interested in, and that will give us a basis for pulling that together. We'll also look at the stability and the predictability of the revenue stream because we understand all these are highly rated credits and we want to build a very conservative funding plan. In terms of the timing and magnitude of the funding needs, we're going to be looking at the 6-year planning window, obviously. But I think we want to look out further than that, outside that planning window for future visible projects, as well as leaving some capacity for some unknowns. So that's going to be important. And then the way we look at this is really on a cash flow basis. In your 6-year plan, you're going to have it in an individual year, but we're going to want to see the spend on that money so that we can match up the various funding sources with the timing, the actual timing of the need. When we look at the next slide, the FY 21 and 22 funding needs have been identified, and we know the TAC is looking at 23 through 26 and trying to prioritize those projects, and we'll be bringing those back to you shortly. As we understand it, there's currently 32 eligible projects already identified for $792 million. When you look at the various forecasted revenues that Christy talked about, those over the 6-year window total about $390 million. And that goes against when you add up the 21 and 22 along with that $792 million, that's $921 million. So there's obviously a shortfall there in what you're able to fund, which logically raises the question, are there other ways of potentially funding that, i.e. what is our debt capacity? And Christy will walk you through that. But on the next slide, just wanted to hit a few high-level pros and cons of debt.
Do we have hard copies of that? Because it's kind of hard to read that detail. Do we have any hard copies of this? Do we have any hard copies of the presentation at all?
We don't. We can put them together.
Or is it available online? Digital?
Can we email it?
There's a lot of detail to try to digest.
Certainly.
What you get from the screen, yeah.
Yeah, we can get that to you.
Just in terms of debt, just a couple high levels. I mean, you know, the pros of doing debt is obviously you're looking to accelerate projects for whatever reason, to get the benefit of the project sooner. Maybe you're worried about the escalating cost of that project, so that might be a reason to look toward doing debt. The cons of doing debt is you're using that future capacity. So you got to be certain that the project that you're accelerating or doing the debt for is you know, of a higher priority than a future project. So that's why we're suggesting and have had preliminary conversations with Chad about looking at a longer term planning horizon. We're going to have the formalized 6-year plan, but we're going to also want to have some visibility on projects outside of that planning. And now I'll turn it back over to Christy to just walk through an illustrative example of that debt capacity. What we're saying with this isn't saying, you know, this is you should go out and spend this. This is just kind of how we would look at what we're preliminary talking about is your credit capacity.
And before I walk you through the example, I just wanted to let you know about the metric that revenue bonds typically use in measuring debt affordability, because I'm sure you all are very familiar with a debt service to general fund expenditure or revenue ratio that is very commonly used in various member localities. It's the same concept. The debt service coverage ratio, it measures the affordability of debt. It's the industry standard ratio for revenue bonds, which will be the type of bonds that Cbta would issue. And it has the revenues in the numerator and the debt service in the denominator. So in essence, it's like the flip-flop version of the debt service to general fund ratio that you might be aware of. So using this illustrative example here, with the revenues totaling 48 million and debt service totaling 24 million, that would equate to a 2 times coverage metric. And all else being equal, higher ratings typically follow higher coverage. And this is, debt service coverage is one of the most reviewed metric that both credit agencies and investors use when they evaluate a revenue bond credit. So then on the next slide, on slide 11, we show an illustrative example of 2 options. Option 1 assumes no debt issuance and that Cbta just funds projects using cash on hand. And that amount totals the 390 million that Kevin mentioned earlier. And all this represents is that 35% regional allocated funds over a 6-year period. We chose to look at a time horizon of 21 through 26 in this example, but obviously that timing would be adjusted based on the Cbta's project for prioritization and what time frame of what time horizon you choose to develop the project lists. But we use that as the base case here. So 390 million just cash available over that 6-year period, versus in option 2, we show you a mix of debt plus cash. And a couple of important assumptions went into this option 2. First is when we made an assumption for debt funded projects, we assumed that only the sales tax revenues would be pledged to the bondholders for the revenue bonds. And we made that assumption because of really 2 reasons. One, at this early stages of things, we wanted to be conservative, so we used a smaller revenue stream. But 2, fuels tax just has a lot more volatility in general, and I think we can all, agree that with the gas prices that we're seeing currently, and just the unknown future of what the roads would look like with the electric cars, that fuels tax revenues just inherently have more risk. So in our scenario, we just assumed sales tax only for the debt funding projects portion. But we did use the fuels tax revenues for the cash available. So in that line item that's labeled as total PAYGO funded projects in option 2 of 334 million, the fuels tax revenues is in that number. So that 334 million is a combination of the fuels tax revenues plus the leftover dollars from the sales tax revenues after paying for debt service. And you can see that when debt is assumed, the amount of project funding capacity increases, in this case, to 635 million. So we just wanted to provide this range of 390 to 635 million for your awareness, so that, you know, when you're thinking about the project lists and the upcoming discussions, you have some framework in mind as to what the funding capacity looks like in this particular 6-year period.
So questions? Questions?
Did you finish?
I think I just have two last things, but
Can we address those questions now? Because I don't want to, well, they're gonna formulate in mind. So the amount of debt that we would actually issue under this seeking a 2.0 coverage is what level? What's the net debt amount of proceeds?
301 million.
So 301 million. So that number's, well, I guess it's the number under option to issue debt. Okay, so 301 million in addition to the 334 would be the PAYGO availability.
Correct.
Okay, that's what you're doing. Okay, so you're summing those two numbers to get to 635.
Correct.
And that'd be over and that's for for entire 6-year period or just the remaining period in this 6-year cycle after the first 2 years are taken out?
This is for the entire 6-year period. We didn't net anything out.
Okay.
So, you know, the 2 years of the project programming that's been done, that is not netted out of any of these figures.
So with that being said, then the availability of the 635 capacity would really be for a 6-year period that would run 24 to 30, because you've done out the first 2 years that we've already allocated for fall line. Does that track?
It would
It
probably
does
be
if you're
slightly
using-
higher because your forecasted revenues are slightly higher.
I just wanna make sure
And
that-
that certainly could run that.
Understands that, but we're not, so that 635 is not really the number for the 6-year plan, because you've already spent 2 years of that.
Correct.
So really, that 635 plus whatever accretion would be available for years 24 through 30, assuming we were to make a decision to do something like this. It'd be 24 through 30 that those dollars would be available.
So Mr. Brand, you are clarifying that?
Yeah, clarifying that point, because one could think that we'd have 635 for this 6-year period, but we've already spent 2 years.
Using that option.
Right, exactly.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up with Mr. Brown's question, though. I believe, Christie, you indicated this was based on 21 through 26.
Correct.
But that being the case, what we've allocated so far actually comes out of that 334, which is the PAYGO. So if we're looking at this as 21 through 26, we need to take our allocations out of the 334, because that's already been spent.
Correct. So it would be 635.3 million less the 104.5 million, which I guess is roughly 500 and some change that's left over for the remaining 4-year period from 23 to 26.
Okay, other questions? You want to complete have you completed yours?
Yes, sir.
And on slide 12, just to wrap things up, I think many of these points Kevin have already touched upon, but you know, once we understand that in April, in the next month or so, that, CVTA is going to be reviewing the project lists and coming up with a list of projects that you wish to fund. And of course, when that materializes, we'll be using that to look at real cash flow needs to develop a funding plan for you, probably more iterations of the analysis that we just looked at on slide 11, but with real numbers. And we have started to do this, but we'll continue to schedule and conduct one-on-one meetings with every member to understand your vision and your objectives. And at the same time, we are planning to hold meetings with the finance directors working group to start talking about elements of debt policy. And lastly, we'll be coming back to this board for periodic briefings and present findings in front of everyone. That concludes our prepared remarks.
Okay, that concludes their report. Any commissioners here or virtually have any questions to ask this group? Ms. Peterson?
Ma'am, you mentioned the factor of 2 for the bond servicing, but what does that relate to in terms of a bond rating? Because I think the bond is going to be very important to this group, but what kind of bond rating we have?
Yes, that's a great question. I can tell you that generally speaking, in the case of both NVTA and HR Tag and I-81, when they all have a 2 times coverage test, and they all received ratings in the AA category. And I think based on the strength of this region's underlying economy, I reasonably expect that we would also be in that category with the 2 times coverage metric.
Other questions?
So, Mr. Chairman, an observation or clarification for the benefit of the commission is that essentially now we have an over-under, right? We one of the questions that we've been wrestling with for the last 2 years is what can we do, both looking at pay-go capacity and looking at a debt funded capacity. And so what we've now heard abstractly is that we could potentially fund projects totaling about $500 million, exclusively with Cbta dollars, and including what we've already funded for Fall Line. Or if leveraging that $500 million with smart scale and other funding sources, we could scale that to some greater capacity. I think one of the things that we've struggled with is there's a big difference between, $300 million where you're paying $65 million a year versus $500 million that you can unleash at one time, and the scope and scale of what you can do there. And then if you assume some leveraging from the infrastructure bill, from smart scale, you could potentially, and again, I won't put them on the spot with guesstimating here, but you could potentially leverage that $500 million with smart scale and other resources to probably something closer to $1 billion worth of regional projects using a debt leverage model. There's a lot more you can do at one time with this knowledge and information, which I think will be important to help the TAC, because right now the TAC is playing with, monopoly money. They don't really know what the budget is, so they can score projects and prioritize projects, but that project scoring won't be resource constrained or resource enhanced based upon the capacity. So when we get their project scores, we're gonna have to figure out which one of these models we want to use, and that's gonna determine how far we can go down that list.
Well, Mr. Brown, thank you for those observations. That's why we have commissioners to bring their expertise aboard and also to bring your questions. And all of this is part of what we talked about in the right foundation. So all of this is a part of that. I think it probably shows that we do have options. And so hopefully with our new partners that we'll be able to get together with PFM. And once we have made clear what our objectives are and all of the commissioners are on board with direction we're going there, what we gotta do is make sure we make the best decisions for this organization. And I think that's what this is all about. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now we have Ms. Heater who will present present the FY 2022 operating budget amendments. Ms. Heater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor. Starting on page 17 of your packet, you will see the recommendation from the Finance Committee with regard to the proposed fiscal 2022 budget amendments. Let me see here, make sure I'm on the right page. So the first column there in the presentation includes the fiscal year 2022 approved budget. The middle column are the proposed transfers, and the far right column are the proposed results of those transfers. The $50,000 administration and staffing is really a placeholder for this fiscal year to be able to accommodate any salaries expenses that may be incurred this fiscal year. Certainly that's far beyond what we project based on the timeline for the recruitment position, but we just wanted to make sure that those funds were held there. The next, moving down the rows, the financial advisory services, again, this is a placeholder for the execution of the agreement with PFM, and it does far exceed the likely expenditures to occur this fiscal year, but we wanted to be able to hold that transfer there to hold the engagement for the annual service. And then finally, the transfer in contracted services is to accommodate the recent work that was performed for the cost estimates to support the regional project prioritization activities. So the total of those transfers are $125,000 transferred from the reserves for contingency line into each of those three line items. The Finance Committee did review this and is recommending approval of these transfers and the approval of the amended budget for this fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman, we'll entertain any questions if there are any for Ms. Heater.
Any questions for Ms. Heater? Requested action here is motion?
Mr. Chairman, can we have a roll call to approve the recommendation of the Finance Committee to recommend the transfer from the contingency reserves line to the personnel and contracted services line items?
Yes, sir. Okay. Would the clerk call the roll for this item?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hodges,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Chair Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mayor Stoney,
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the vote on that item and the motion passed.
Mr. Chairman, now we need an authorization of the public hearing for the FY 23 Cbta administrative and operating expense budget. And this is an item from Ms. Heater.
Thank you. Again, the Finance Committee reviewed the fiscal 2023 proposed budget. There in your packet is we've included a copy of a comparison of the FY 2022 budget that you just approved, as well as the proposed fiscal 2023 proposed budget. You'll note some changes to the allocation of funds by line item. It does assume a reservation, I'll say, of $500,000 from the total revenues projected for next fiscal year to be set aside before any of the by formula distributions occur. And then the balance of the budget totaling $773,830 comes from the carry forward from prior years operating accounts. So I think that that's an important point to be aware of in moving this forward. The Finance Committee did discuss that a little bit, and I think that there was some discussion that if there's a desire to want to increase the funding set aside for the operating budget out of the fiscal 2023 revenues, it would be good to undertake that as part of the public review process prior to establishing the formulas for next fiscal year. But at this point in time, the proposed budget for fiscal 2023 assumes the $500,000 set aside from next year's revenues and has been recommended to move forward for a public hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Heater. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to authorize the public hearing on the FY23 Cvta Administrative and Operating Expense Budget for April 29, 2022, with a 15-day public comment period.
Heard the motion?
I believe
That's my
that's
motion.
committee, that's a committee recommendation, I believe, Mr. Chairman.
That's correct. No need for a second as it came from committee.
Don't need a second. Okay, the clerk will call the roll on this item.
Thank you. Mr. Hodges,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Chair Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mayor Sconey,
Aye.
and Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the vote on that item and the motion passed.
Mr. Chairman, the last part of my report is the regional funding item for the FY 2023 to FY 26. Mr. Parson will provide details.
Yes, sir.
Maybe.
I didn't see that on the.
Oh, I guess that's,
Technical committee?
I don't want us to do too much more work than what we already have on our agenda. But we'll save that for the next. I think that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, now we move to the Cbta Technical Advisory Committee update.
Thank you.
You, Mr. Parsons.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I think Mr. Yor is available to help me out with this, but at this point, we want to provide an update under 2A on the Fall Line Working Group. There are there are 4 items that the working group has asked for action on, really to get things started with the hard work of deciding the commitments of allocating the committed funds. I think we're the right term. For the Fall Line and where that process should start. So the Fall Line Working Group has been meeting and working with Mr. Mann and his team at Vdot to come up with some options for consideration by the Cbta. And I'm going to share my screen to show 3 options for design build packages that are currently being considered. Hopefully everyone is able to see this. They are also in the packet.
They're also in the packet.
For everyone in the room. And there's really, the action request, the first item there is to request the Vdot proceed with the development and delivery of packages 1 and 2. So on the screen is package 1, which is focused on the southern section of the Fall Line with projects in Chesterfield County, Colonial Heights, Petersburg. And then also to proceed with package 2, which is now on the screen, and that includes the northern edge of the Fall Line segments, which extends from the already completed portion in the town of Ashland south through Hanover County into northern Henrico County. So that's the first action that's requested. I think the hope is that we can take all these at one time. The second action requested, item 2, is to authorize the chair to enter into an agreement with the Commonwealth Transportation Board and Vdot for the development and delivery of those 2 design build packages. That agreement is not prepared yet. This is really just setting the wheels in motion to move that forward. Item 3 is to allocate Cbta funds for conducting a preliminary impact and operational analysis scope and cost estimate for a project package or packages in the city of Richmond to cover some of that central portion of the trail. And we are working with the city to determine what that budget will contain. And we think we're very close to having that. So the working group will continue working on that. And then finally, the fourth action is to direct the Fall Line Working Group and the Cbta TAC to develop a schedule and spending plan for the remaining segments of the trail to include recommendations for funding options to secure the needed balance of funding to complete the trail. So that's the package of actions that are requested from the Fall Line Working Group.
So
Mr. Year is with us, happy to take any
are
questions.
there any questions that any commissioners have? Mr. Ewer and Mr. Parson will try and entertain those questions.
I have a question on the section that's going through Hammer. Does that include the crossing of the Chickahominy?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Timms?
More, I think for Mr. Brown, the CTB funds that are allocated to this, are those completely state? Are there any federal funding sources within that?
I don't know exactly how the dollars are allocated.
It's all state.
It's all state?
All state.
And for the benefit of persons who are in the virtual setting, if you'd be so kind to kind of raise your volume levels a little higher, it'd be helpful for them to understand what it is that you're saying. That can be all very, very helpful. Other questions? Any questions from our commissioners in the virtual setting? Okay. So we can do all of these as a group. Yes, sir. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion for these as a group.
So moved.
Second?
Motion has been probably made in second. So at this time, we'll have electronic vote. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Hodges,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour.
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Chair Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mayor Stoney,
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the vote on that item and the motion passed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the next item under 2B, the FY21 annual reports, we'll take that first. Those were included in the packet. I have shared that all of those local funding certifications have been signed. And I appreciate the effort that every jurisdiction has put into getting those returned. So we are now fulfilling the reporting requirements for fiscal year 21. So those are included in your packet, and the requested action is shown in the agenda. The motion is to accept the FY21 annual local funding certification.
And before we take a vote on that, I want to thank all of the localities for getting that information in, because that really kind of helps the flow of things. So I want to reiterate what Mr. Parsons said. Thank you so much for your timely information. This is helpful to the whole group there. Okay, at this time, we have, that's a motion here, right? Yes, please. Okay, motion to accept the fiscal year 21 annual local funding certifications.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion has been made
Second.
and probably second, okay. All right, we will have electronic vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hodges,
Aye.
Mr. Carroll,
Aye.
Mr. Spoonhour,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Aye.
Chair Thornton,
Aye.
Mr. Byerly,
Aye.
Mayor Stoney,
Aye.
Mr. Brown. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the vote on that item and the motion passed.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay.
Mr. Chair, the last item under the TAC report is dealing with the record keeping for our current fiscal year as well as the expectations for next fiscal year. So starting on page 32, the quarterly expenditures are information that has been submitted by member jurisdictions in terms of funds that have been allocated locally from Cbta revenues and the projects that those funds are allocated to. This reporting will be finalized on June 30th and will go into the annual certifications for FY22. So this is updated real time as we get new reports from the member jurisdictions on what the spending is. The last item is the following page, which is our work in progress for the FY23 local allocation plans. And this is what has been submitted by the member jurisdictions in terms of expectations for what funds will be expended from Cvta local funds starting July 1. And staff will continue tracking this and prepare the final local allocation plan for acceptance later this fiscal year.
Okay.
Happy to take any questions on these. As I said, these are both works in progress.
Commissioners, that was for information. Any questions to ask Mr. Parson on what he has just reported to you?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a question, but I would like to ask that when we have something like this in the future printed on a larger page, this is very difficult for me.
I can read it just fine.
Yeah.
Keep on living.
Okay, that will change, Mayor.
Let's get this copy.
I have the smaller copy. I didn't pick it up over there.
Okay.
That's fine.
Customer service.
Wow, I cannot argue with that. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, that completes the TAC report.
Okay, now we go to Cbta staffing, Executive Director search update. Mrs. Spoonhour.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be brief. Good morning from Paducah, Kentucky. First off, thank you, staff, for making this option so I could participate this morning from Western Kentucky. I'll be brief. We are a very attractive region, it appears. We've got a great number of applicants. As of this morning, we have 13 applicants that the HR roundtable will be reviewing. So the plan is for the posting to end by the end of this week, and we will take a look to make sure feel like we've got a good number of qualified candidates before we make a decision to if we need to extend it or not. But it's moving along well, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Mr. Spoonhour, your voice is going in and out. Commissioners, any question to ask Mr. Spoonhour? Okay, I don't see any at this juncture. Okay, Mr. Spoonhour, thank you so very much for that update.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so commissioners, other business, is there any other business that any commissioner want to mention at all that we should know about? If not, this is a moment also for your August comments. Any comments, any commissioners? Mr. Vice Chair, would you share any information that you'd like to share with everyone?
Sure. I want to give everybody else an opportunity first. So one of the things we've been doing in Chesterfield with our board is each one of us has held a podcast as an update for what's going on within our specific part of the county, and also to address other issues within the county as well. And it's gone over very well in the community, and I've offered the opportunity up for the chair and I to do a podcast together, talking about the Cvta, the actual, from the creation, where the Cvta has come in the last 2 years, and where we see it going in the future. And then I want to also offer the same opportunity for all members of the Cvta to come forward and do a podcast with us as well, to talk about each individual organization's role, how they've enjoyed it, what they see moving forward. And really what we do first is we'll get together and we'll talk about what the message is that we want to get to the community. And then when we get together, we'll do the podcast to get that message out. And I think it's a lot of people are listening to podcasts now. And as we do it, it'll be shared with each locality to push out for their social media and their websites. And then, because each one of us, I think, brings a unique perspective and a unique opportunity to talk about their jurisdiction or the organization that they work for, whether it be Vdot or the Commonwealth Transportation Board or GRTC, and get the message out to the community of all the great things, quite frankly, that the Cvta is working towards and has established in the last 2 years. And so we've got some dates set up for that, and we look forward to getting the first one off established, and welcome, and again, the opportunity for anybody else who would like to participate in that. Because one of the things we've talked about in the other organization, Plan RVA, is about our branding and how we get the message out. And I think any effort that we can do to get the message to the community is a great opportunity. And so that's what we're planning. And I would extend that invitation to everyone else who is interested, because I really do think that the more information we get to the community, maybe we'll actually get more people coming to participate online or in future meetings to come in here and ask questions about some of the great projects that we're trying to fund, and even about, talk about the financial side of how the Cvta works and how the money works. And so there's a lot of great opportunities here for us to bring forward to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. And I don't have to tell this august bunch of commissioners how important it is for us to get the word out, so that if someone whispers Cvta, that some people know what we're talking about. And groups have to be very careful as we meet. We know what those letters stand for, but there's a lot of other people who do not. And all of us, I want to ask you to help us to get the word out. And ending on that, don't forget too that the chair also offers an invitation if you want me to visit your locality, talk about the Cbta. Some member localities have already done that, so again, we extend that to you. Any other comments from commissioners? Mr.
I
Hodges.
just thought Mr. Carroll's presentation is a great idea, and hope to participate with help.
Thank you.
It's actually painless.
Mr. Chair, I just have one announcement.
Okay, one announcement from Mr. Parsons.
Mr. Chair, you had asked at the beginning of the meeting if there were any changes in membership, and I failed to recognize that there is a change in membership. And I think this is a cause to congratulate Ms. Jennifer DeBrule is now the acting director of the Department of Rail
True, okay. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Care to say a word?
Not something I was looking to do, but I'm very excited. We've got a great team at DRPC and lots of good things to do as we help transit agencies like GRTC and work with CSX and Norfolk Southern on big rail initiatives around the Commonwealth coming out of COVID. We've got a lot of good stuff ahead of us, so building on a strong foundation. So glad to be here and really grateful for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you again, congratulations. As each member, whatever you do is a reflection of all of us, and we appreciate that. Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioners, you see that next date for us is April the 29th, okay? All right, stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.